What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to the channel. Today I'm going to be talking to you guys about how we made Neon. So first I want to talk a little bit about the technological specifications, such as the cameras and lens choice. Most of this project was shot on the exact same lens, on the exact same camera for consistency, and that was the Zcam E2 S6 paired with the Rokinon 35mm lens. One of the reasons we chose to do this was because I wanted it to have kind of a vintage look to it. I wanted it to have a film look, so we used dehancer and post-production to make it kind of have this film emulation kind of thing going on. And at the same time, there were some scenes where you might have noticed that the grain was a little bit heavy, and we did that because we really wanted the kind of film look to kind of come out of it, and we paired the 35mm with it because it's a Super 35 sensor, and it just the image just looks large and amazing whenever you view it. It's just awesome. So I chose that lens because it was something that worked for all the scenarios. It wasn't zoomed up too close, it wasn't too wide, it was just right, and it just worked for our purposes, especially when balancing things. Now that we have some of the tech specs out of the way, I want to kind of go scene by scene and break down the scenes and whatnot, and what choices were made on set, and kind of go over some of the behind the scenes footage. So for the first scene, obviously you have our character Ivy, played by Madison Paige West, sitting on this porch, and this guy kind of runs up on her, grabs her, starts wrestling with her, and just kind of kidnapping her. That entire sequence was actually improvised by the talent. I went up to them before we shot the scene, and I essentially said, hey, here there's supposed to be kind of like this kidnapping thing and whatnot that goes on, and you're supposed to drag her down the stairs. And I asked them if they could safely do that, and they indicated that they could. And so then I asked them, once you safely take Madison off of, or the character Ivy, but the actress Madison, once she's down the stairs and whatnot, somehow Johnny's supposed to end up on the ground, and she's supposed to end up on top of him and tries to punch him. And then of course he reveals it's a prank and whatnot. So I asked them, are you guys able to kind of come up with this little fight sequence here to show your two characters kind of going at it for a second? And they essentially asked for a little bit of time to come up with that sequence. So I went inside, did a little bit of camera prep, and I came back out and they said, this is what we have. And I watched them kind of perform a mock-up version of it, and I was like, okay, that looks good, and you guys are safely able to do this. They said, yes, we can do this safely. I said, go for it. And that's kind of how that shot went. And in my mind, I'm thinking I would definitely want this to be a oneer. I definitely don't want any cuts. In hindsight, that decision definitely could have used a little bit of work, particularly whenever they're actually speaking to each other. This kind of movement back and forth between them with the whip pans was not the greatest idea, but I really liked pushing in on the character that was designed to be a super slow and stable shot. I did the best I could with that rig. The Steadicam rig I have is not like an actual Tiffin Steadicam one. It's I think it's Pro Aim or something like that, so it's not the greatest by any means. So I did my best, and I kind of wanted to push in whenever he hits the ground. And the entire purpose and the motivation behind these shots was to try and introduce the characters, to introduce the audience and whatnot, and I feel like we accomplished that. I think that we did that very well here. Moving into the second scene, we have this beautiful lighting, which shout out to Torch Star for sending us some lights. We did purchase some lights as well, but they sent us additional lights on request, so that was awesome of them, and they just have an awesome product, and it worked for us for lighting, and we'll probably use them again in the future. So definitely check them out if you want to check it out. Down in the description below there's a link to them. But Torch Star sent us some lights, and the scene looked absolutely phenomenal. Whenever we were shooting that, we had initially just put the red kind of light that you see in the back. We put that light there, and we were actually about to roll camera, and then I said, wait a minute, hold on. What if we put like that LED strip kind of around the door frame? And so we stopped everything. We went and configured the lighting, and it looked 10 times better that way, especially with that color contrast and hitting off of Ivy's face. So this scene was really simple. You know, these two characters are talking, and they have this kind of sad moment come in when they learn that other runners have been killed and whatnot, and the entire thing is supposed to be, you know, at first it's a further introduction into the plot, and then it turns into like this really sad kind of moment. And for those who've been around for a while, who watched the Tommy Baker interview that I did a while back, you know, something that he spoke about that I really learned was motivating your shots, motivating the camera and the lighting, and everything has kind of this reason to it. And so I kind of looked at it from that perspective the entire time while shooting. And in this particular scene, you'll notice that whenever the announcement comes that there had been runners that got killed in the village and whatnot, that the camera starts to pull back from them. This was really intentional. This was done to be kind of like Tommy's example of a child being ripped away from its mother. You know, this is kind of like that happening. It's a very big, sad moment, and pulling it away shows like a loss to these characters. And pushing in was to kind of show them talking to each other in a happy manner and whatnot. So, you know, combining these camera moves, I think we made a really interesting, dynamic scene that changes throughout the scene. And the mood changes and whatnot, and the music was actually something I composed. I composed the music for the majority of the project, and this scene, it kind of shows. So yeah, that was a really interesting take. And then after that, we move on to the scene where, unfortunately, I don't have any BTS of it, but the scene where they exit and they're continuously talking. Fun fact about that scene is the internal scene with the blue and red lighting, that took a lot longer than we were expecting it to be, and we actually had 3 days to film the whole thing, so we were running way behind schedule. It was totally worth it for that scene, in my opinion. Even in hindsight, I think that was absolutely worth it. It was a good decision, in my opinion, but at the same time, we have, you know, a set amount of time for these scenes, and we're running out of time, so we ended up accidentally overshooting by quite a bit. And we ended up having to use supplemental lighting, which is why the lighting looks a little bit different in the third scene compared to the first scene, because time had gone through in the day, and the sun had shifted, and it had gotten dark a lot earlier than anticipated. So we ended up having to use supplemental lighting and whatnot and get it back on track, and it looked pretty close. So, you know, it wasn't super noticeable, but if you were looking out for it, you'd probably see it, that it was supplemental lighting. For this, you know, we wanted to show these two characters kind of in this intense kind of moment, where she's wanting to run off and essentially just take over the world in a way, and he's telling her to be smart and whatnot. This was kind of an interesting scene to me because it shows his more calm side compared to her more erratic side. And I think that the way these two actors portrayed it was absolutely phenomenal. And there was this insert shot of a pendant, and it was just a beautiful piece that was actually lent to us by my co-writer, Joseph Himes. He had lent us that to use on set as a prop. And it was a beautiful piece of jewelry, and it has a lot of lore behind it. The intention behind that was to show that a different group who wasn't able to supply them with the upgraded chatting software that they had asked for, they couldn't provide that, so they instead provided this pendant, which had been lost forever ago, but somehow one of their runners stole it and now gave it to the character Johnny, who's played by Ethan, and then Ethan gives it to Madison, who's playing Ivy. And it's this really awesome moment where she finds her mom's pendant this way. So it was a very powerful moment. And then, of course, that leads us to the next scene in the club. The club scene was really difficult because as far as the dialogue portion goes, we had 15 minutes to shoot it, and it was terrible. So we had actually rented out Headliners, which is a music venue in Louisville. We rented out Headliners. Shout out to Micah, you were amazing to work with. But we rented out Headliners for an hour. We set up for about 30 minutes. The lighting was very, very elegant in there, and we did a lot of supplemental lighting with the lighting strips and some tube lights and whatnot, and it was very extensive as far as our lighting modifications goes. They were quite extensive. So because of this, we didn't have too much time. We had an hour to begin with, and we had overshot our time slot on all of the other places, and I really didn't want to do that to Headliners. So we ended up shooting the B-roll scene of the talent walking up the stairs, and that was done before the audio guy got there because our boom operator hadn't gotten the set yet. And so I said, okay, let's get the B-roll done. And that's what we did. We shot all the B-roll and whatnot, and setting up for this. I mean, I knew I wanted this really interesting steady cam shot. And at one point she had to walk up the stairs, and when she walked up the stairs, she had to go past me, and like on a ledge by those stairs, by the bottom of them, not at the bottom, but like over top of the bottom, that we had a C-stand with a light on it for mood. And she had to walk up the stairs in a certain way where we would use her to block that, use her body to block it, and the camera would just follow her, and we would try to avoid getting it on camera. Of course, it shows in some aspects. Some of you might have also realized that in that particular scene, it appears to be in a different aspect ratio. In fact, it was shot in Cinema 6K like the rest of it. But the boom ended up getting into the frame really, really badly. Not for lack of trying. We had 15 minutes to shoot the dialogue whenever the boom op got there. So we just didn't have time. We had to roll with the punches, and we did end up getting that scene knocked out. We did, just crop it out at the top and bottom to make it look like it was just shot in a different aspect ratio. But that's kind of how that scene went. I think that they did great in that scene. I really liked JT, a good friend of mine. He played Roman, and he did a really interesting interpretation of the character. And I think that he did portray Roman in a good way. And we hope to be making a Roman short film, but that is not completed yet, of course. So stay tuned for that. After the club scene, we have the scene where the main character, Ivy, is talking to a mentor of hers from the past that she doesn't know is her mentor. So it's a little bit of lore going on here, but these two characters are kind of speaking on this bridge together. And the funny thing about the scene, I don't have any BTS, unfortunately, of this one because it was done late at night. It was super cold outside. This was before I had any of my winter gear that I have now. So it was like just really not the greatest, but I had actually walked through that location before. It was at Cherokee Park, and I'd walked through there before, and I thought this would be the perfect place for the scene. And I, for some reason, remember seeing like street lamps there in front of that bridge, and I thought, oh, that's gonna light the set, and then we'll have the lighting strips at the bottom and whatnot, and it'll be cool. And then we get there at nighttime, and there's no nightlight, and it was completely pitch black. And we had been shooting all day, all of our batteries were low, it was cold outside, people were hungry, it was like just not the ideal scenario. But thankfully we did get it banged out. Of course, we put down one strip of lighting. We had our gaffer, Clayton Luce. He was kind of Hollywooding the light as well for supplemental lighting for their faces. Obviously, the scene is very dark. This was unintentional. However, the E2S6 did an amazing job with grabbing as much camera data as possible, even in a low light scenario. I think I only bumped up the ISO to 1600 because I typically try to avoid high ISOs. I typically don't go above 1600. So it was really interesting that the Z-Cam was able to capture so much image data even on a low ISO, and then we were able to really bring it out in post. But while it is dark and it's not super detailed, it is good enough to where you can kind of see the characters and whatnot. And I think they did a very good job on that scene. I like the way the mentor is portrayed by Steve Ferris. He's the actor that did that. And overall, I think it's a very, very important scene. And the behind the scenes, while not super extensive, and unfortunately we don't have any footage of it, it is a really quick setup. And we had Clayton Hollywooding the light, and we had just the camera on the tripod. It was cold and it was quick, so we got it done. So the scene after that shows the character kind of leaving this building, and from a story perspective, there's kind of a chunk missing there. That's because we actually missed one of the scenes. We missed our time slot at a separate studio that we weren't able to fit in. So unfortunately, we kind of messed up and we had to cut that out. But you see her walking alongside this building, and that had happened. That building that she's walking beside is the studio that we missed our time slot at. I had asked them if we could film outside in their parking lot. They said yes, but they did still unfortunately charge us to use their parking lot. We didn't really have a choice, so we did pay the fee. We used the parking lot. They were supposed to be out there with us to prevent people from going into the set because we had firearms on production. We had like real firearms being used by the cast members. Of course, we had an armor and all protocols were followed. And for the record, we are filming in Kentucky, so open carrying an AR-15 or any other kind of firearm is completely allowed in the state of Kentucky, no matter where you're at anyways. So this was shot in a studio or right outside the studio in a bad part of town, unfortunately, and we had firearms and people with plate carriers, and it kind of looked sketch. So we had asked the local police department if they would help us out. They didn't really want to send us a car to help us out. They just kind of said, if somebody tries to take your camera, defend yourselves. That's kind of how that conversation went. For this scene, the behind the scenes, unfortunately, I don't have any footage of it, but it was kind of interesting because we had to do that scene as quickly as possible because it was not a great area where we was filming it. So we wanted to get out as quickly as possible. Especially considering that we had real rifles on set. We definitely wanted to just get in and out. So whenever we filmed this, the monitor was still attached to my Steadicam from the other shots we were doing that day, and I only had one monitor, so I didn't have time to disassemble the monitor bracket and whatnot, because it's not an easy one to disassemble, the one that I have, unfortunately. So that I couldn't just take it off and then put it back onto my Z-Cam, unfortunately, and we just didn't have the time. So I actually had it on my shoulder and I was just eyeballing where the camera lens was pointed. That's why it's like super shaky and whatnot, and it was supposed to be a stabilized shot, but unfortunately we weren't able to set up the Steadicam and all that stuff, because again, we just wanted to get in and out of there as quickly as possible. So we just kind of went with the shoulder carry, and I was just kind of eyeing it, and it took like 3 or 4 takes, but we did get it done, thankfully, and that scene is history. The next scene was actually shot on the first day. That was the first scene that we had shot of this entire project. That was the one that was done first, and it was extensive. We had a very, very extensive kind of winter that's going on, and there's no cuts and whatnot, so if you messed up, you'd have to go back and do the whole thing all over again. And it did take several tries. God bless our assistant camera, Logan. He did his best, but it was, dark, and I think he was pulling on a T2.9 aperture. So for those who don't know, that's insanely hard, even for good first ACs. That's difficult. So he did his best, and it did take a couple tries. Some of you might have noticed that whenever the camera kind of pans around Agent Frank, the focus is really off, and it takes a minute to catch up. Well, we were using a wireless focus system, and there was a delay and whatnot, and I'd asked the AC, hey, if we go around him really slowly, is that going to help you a little bit? And he said, yes, it would. So we went slow around him to help out our AC. That is the only reason why that happened. Otherwise, it would have just been a lot faster. Throughout the scene, of course, we have a little bit of BTS here with the lighting, showing the lighting setup. thankfully, because it was indoors and because all the paint around us was white, the blue was kind of reflecting off of that. And so those blue strips were actually enough to light the set. And then the red exit sign, that was already there, but we chose to shoot that the way we did because of that exit sign being there. It kind of gives it this neon feeling. I really liked that color contrast that happened. So I had gone to the talent before shooting. I had gone to the talent and I'd said, hey, you guys are supposed to have a fight that kind of happens here. Do you guys want to, they're both stunt fighting trained. So I asked them to kind of come up with their own choreography that they could safely do. And so they did that. I went downstairs to do some more configuration and stuff with my camera. I go back upstairs. They tell me their plan. I say, great, let's try it out. We tried it out a couple times and it ended up working. The next scene that you guys see is the interrogation scene, and the interrogation scene is arguably the best scene out of the entire project. I really, really liked the interrogation scene. It was just the best performance from everybody. That was like top tier acting right there, in my opinion. So let's break it down. I don't have too much BTS for this. I want to give a big shout out to our makeup artist, Sarah Jo, who has been on some really, really awesome projects, some very, very large productions, and I am grateful that she was on set with us that day. And she did an absolutely amazing job, especially with the time frame that she had. It was honestly an honor to have her on our set. But moving forward on how we actually got the shots, we set it up 2 over the shoulders, which I consider pretty standard for something like this. I was obviously the camera operator for the whole project, so we had 2 over the shoulders, and the lighting, we had this infinity wall, and then of course our gaffer Clayton, he did a really great job with setting up supplemental lighting on top of her and whatnot, and it was just great. I really loved the lighting, and after we shot that, we initially was going to have the scene last for like 15 seconds for her getting punched, and I was like, I think it would be really powerful if we had some kind of music swelling in the background, and then whenever she's being punched, it just keeps going, and it doesn't like just cut after 15 seconds. Like, it keeps going and going and going, and it would be a bit more brutal, and it would be really cool for the story. So we ended up shooting it that way. I wanted to have this like side look, this 90-degree angle filmed, straight onto them, because I wanted there to be an obvious dynamic where he's above her and she's below, and you could see the size difference between them. Again, speaking to Tommy Baker's speech about motivation in the camera and whatnot. So this is one of those times where we're talking about motivation with the camera, and I felt like the scene kind of called for something like that, and it was pulling back the entire time, and it was just a really, really powerful moment, I think, and that was probably my favorite scene. It was definitely a tough scene, and it was like, as director, it was kind of uncomfortable for me to film because I consider myself a very protective person when it comes to women. So seeing a woman in front of me getting fake punched a bunch of times, it kind of hurt, and it wasn't like emotionally easy for me to film it. And I knew that because it was so impactful to me and I'm just filming it and I know that it's fake, if it was that impactful to me, I knew it was going to really hit our audiences the way that I wanted it to. And, they would be like, oh my God, like this big thing happened. I had gone up to the actor who's playing Agent Frank. His name is Jeffrey. So I had gone up to Jeffrey before we shot that scene. I pulled him to the side and I said, look, I want to get a genuine reaction out of the actress. I want, because this is supposed to be a breaking point for her character. And it's supposed to be an enhanced interrogation and whatnot. And I told him, like, I want you to do something that's going to catch her off guard, but not scare her to the point where she breaks character. But I want you to scare her a little bit. And so he told me he'll slam on the desk and whatnot. And so we asked permission from the studio. Studio said, cool, go ahead and do it, because it wasn't our desk, it was their desk. But they were there on set with us. And so the studio let us use that desk to pound on, and we wanted it to be a one-take wonder. And unfortunately, the take where he does it for the first time, slamming the table, and like kind of it jars her up a little bit, Unfortunately, that take couldn't be used, so we ended up having to do it over and over again. But it was, I think that again, the performance from the actors and the actresses, I think they did great. So this scene is definitely in the books for me as one of my greatest scenes of all time. The last scene is really, really simple to go through. It's really simple as far as the look and whatnot. It's just the character walking up to this house, and this is kind of an interesting moment because this guy is the mentor, right? So he shows up once more after the original scene on the bridge, and you're probably wondering, well, what's this about? Well, there's two scenes that didn't make the final cut, and the last scene that didn't get into the final cut was actually right after that, and it's supposed to be her father, and her father is the one on the other end of the phone, and he's like supposed to say, all right, keep me updated, and then he gets assassinated. That scene, unfortunately, the actor that we wanted to play that, he wasn't available, but it's not out of the cards for us to make a director's cut later on and still film that scene, because I think it would be really awesome to see that put together. But it obviously it all just boils down to time, to whether or not we have the time to do that. That being said, we have gone through every single scene, kind of behind the scenes and how it was made and whatnot. We've gone through some of the BTS footage and whatnot. One of the things that I just wanted to leave you guys off with is, obviously, one of the jobs of a director is problem solving, and there was quite a number of problems. There was a time on set where I was introduced with 4 problems within a time span of 3 minutes, and it was caught on the GoPro, and I thought it was just phenomenal. Like, watching back that footage and seeing how I bounce between these things and work under pressure, it was really, really interesting to see. And I showed it to some of my friends, and they're like, wow, that's pretty nuts. So, I think that there are definitely some things we could have done different on Neon. I think that there's definitely some key takeaways and learning experiences for me as a filmmaker. And I don't often make YouTube videos like this. As you guys know, I typically just upload a short film here and there, but, I'm thinking of making more and more YouTube videos, kind of talking about my process and this journey that I'm on for filmmaking, and kind of connecting with you guys a little bit. But I just think that this particular project, while difficult and while it was definitely trial and error, some things worked, some things didn't. I couldn't be more happy with the cast and crew. I think everybody did a great job, and I still think we made something pretty cool. But time will tell. Maybe we'll use VFX in the future. It's something that we're looking into, So let us know what you guys think. Let us know if you have any questions, comments, concerns, tips, ideas. Feel free to, shout anything in the comment section. We'll check it out. But with that being said, I hope you guys enjoyed the video. I hope you got to see a little bit more of the inside of Neon, and I can't wait to share with you what comes next.